In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Jesus. Santa Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus nunc and hora mortis nostrae. Amen. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Everyone, or I guess almost afternoon. Today is January 21st, 2021. And I was doing some light reading of the catechisms last night. I've been honestly trying to stay off the news, and I don't really have social media anymore. So all I really have is YouTube. I did have Parlor, but now that has been shut down and banned. I'm not on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram. So I really only have YouTube. So I get all my news or whatever from YouTube. All my virtual social interaction I get from YouTube. And I don't have cable. I don't watch TV. So what does that mean? When I'm not working or taking care of my children and I have some downtown downtime, I read. So I've instituted recently 30 minutes of scripture a day, which has been awesome. And I'm just starting with Genesis, and my plan is to try to read the whole Bible. It's a lot. I don't want to bite off more than I can chew, but that's the plan anyway. But I also frequently read other religious books. I don't really read too much of anything that's not religious. Occasionally, maybe I'll read some Dave Ramsey, not so much anymore. Yeah, everything I have is pretty much informational in the religious department. So with that being said, I have two catechisms. One is the new one. This is a Pope John Paul II catechism, I guess they would call it. And this was published, I believe, in the 90s. And I think it says it's the complete and updated one. So whatever that means. There's a bunch of copyright dates. 94, United States Catholic Conference, Inc. And then I have an old school one, and this is my favorite. The Catechism Explained, an exclusive exposition of the Christian religion with special reference to the present state of society and the spirit of the age. Now, while I like this one a lot better, I think it does offer better explanations. It's not a good reference guide as far as being able to communicate with other people, whereas this is the typical catechism format where you can say, section 637 of the catechism, and everybody knows what you're referring to. Also, this one is good for some specific things to our modern era, such as like homosexuality is more of a descriptive analysis of that in here rather than this one where it wasn't such a big deal, I think, maybe back when this was written. Abortion is more talked about in the new one, whereas it wasn't that big of an issue back then, so there's not much spent on here, time spent on abortion in here. But with that being said, I found something fascinating last night in regards to socialism and communism. Now, considering that this one was written right around the collapse of the Soviet Union, definitely after Our Lady of Fatima warned us about communism, I would expect communism and socialism to be more talked about in here. And there's only really a couple paragraphs on it that I'm going to read. But there's pages and pages and pages of socialism explained in here, and very much so called out for the evil that it is, and then definitive answers as to why it is evil. With that being said, I think we largely find ourselves where we're at right now, where the church, for whatever reason, many church members, many who proclaim to be Catholic, are viewing socialism and democratic socialism, really it's just communism. They're viewing it as something that's good. And I, like, for the life of me, could not. I mean, I've spent like hours and hours pondering how this happens. And I think the short of it, among other things, is the lack of
the lack of explanation to why it's evil in the modern church. It's just something that's not talked about. While many Catholics will say socialism is evil because it's atheistic, the older catechism does a much better job of breaking that down and showing you exactly this is why it's evil. This is what they want to do, and this is how it goes against God's law. Whereas that's missing from the new catechism. So I think we find ourselves in this situation because we have largely glossed over in recent times the actual intrinsic evil of socialism and communism, combines with the fact that this is what bothers me so much about the newer one. It really talks about communism as being, and socialism as being, in the arena of social justice, it being bad for social justice reasons. Whereas in here, it directly talks about how it's bad as far as Christianity goes. It's just not compatible with Christianity and the laws of God. So we're doing ourselves a great injustice. So I would say this is why I always say you need to have an updated catechism, but you need to have a traditional one as well. Because issues that may not have, been so blaringly apparent when this was written, maybe will come and make a reappearance in the future, as we are now seeing with communism. So I'm going to read both sections, so just bear with me for a minute. But I think it's important to see the contrast and maybe understand why we are where we are. So it's under the social doctrine of the church, and there's really only a couple paragraphs on it. It does call out capitalism. It actually spends more time bashing capitalism than it does socialism, if you can believe that. So what does it say? The church. This is paragraph 2425. Well, we can actually start from the one before that. The disordered desire for money cannot but produce perverse effects. It is one of the causes of the many conflicts which disturb the social order. And I'm already annoyed because the desire for money is goes far beyond disturbing the social order, but they do get into it a little bit. A system that subordinates the basic rights of individuals and of groups to the collective organization of production is contrary to human dignity. Every practice that reduces persons to nothing more than a means of profit enslaves man, leads to idolizing money and contributes to the spread of atheism. You cannot serve God and mammon. 2425. The church has rejected the totalitarian and atheistic ideologies associated in modern times with communism or socialism. She has likewise refused to accept, in the practice of capitalism, individualism in the absolute primacy of the law of the marketplace over human labor. Regulating the economy solely by centralized planning perverts the basis of social bonds. Regulating it solely by the law of the marketplace fails social justice, for there are many human needs which cannot be satisfied by the market. Reasonable regulation of the marketplace and economic initiatives, in keeping with a just hierarchy of values and a view to the common good, is to be commended. Yeah, and that's what they say. That's all they say on it. And it's just, that's not going to work for me. And here's why. You come over to this catechism, and I'm telling you, there is like 4 pages calling it out. Um, this is actually, it's not under the social teachings of the church, it's under the commandments. An actual violation of the commandments, and for this, the 10th commandment. In the 10th commandment, God forbids us to endeavor to possess ourselves of the property of another by unlawful means. So they're almost relating communism and socialism to theft. By this power, this centralized government system coming in and usurping people's property. And they're calling that a violation of the 10th commandment. That's a big difference between social teaching and an actual violation of the law of God. In God's sight, the will is equivalent to the deed. Evil desires are sinful as well as evil deeds, as the act is accomplished in will. Therefore, transgressions of this commandment must not be omitted in confession. Council of Trent. And then we have under this the first thing under the violation of the 10th commandment is socialism. In our own day, a large proportion of the so called socialists or social democrats aim at depriving their fellow man of their private property by unjust means. Social democracy, or the rule of the people, proposes to construct human society. It is of recent origin, being first started in Germany in 1840 and propagated some 10 years later by the notorious Jew Marx. In 1862, another Jew named Lassalle, I forget how to say his name, Lasalle, Lassalle, was very successful in spreading socialistic doctrines, so much so that in 1878 a special law was passed for the suppression of socialism. Associations and meetings were prohibited, publications advocating its principles were seized, and the leading agitators were banished from several of the large towns. From that time forward, the work of propagation was carried on covertly, in the workshop and clubroom, meetings being held in the woods, and pamphlets circulated privately. In 1880, a socialistic congress was held in Zurich, attended by members from all the countries of Europe, to arrange a general program for the universal upheaval of society and subversion of the existing order of things. Now, I just can't help to think that there was an evil conspiracy in the church at the time that the new catechism was written, and I think largely due to the fact that communists had infiltrated the seminaries, that glosses over socialism. And in that case, it's not hard to look around and understand how we got here then, right? I'll continue. Since then, the system has made steady progress and assumed a revolutionary character. Don't we see that? Those who resort to open acts of violence, BLM, excuse me, I have something in my throat, in order to accelerate the disintegration of society are called anarchists. Switzerland is a hotbed of socialism, and there the principal organs of the society are printed. Now, is it any surprise that we see corrupt clergy being trained in Switzerland? And I think the answer is no. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, look up scandals in the United States Church, cardinals, and who they were trained by and where. Socialism, and also hotbed for the occult as well, and that is not a coincidence at all. Socialism has gained ground chiefly on the continent of Europe. The object of socialists is this: they want all private property to be confiscated by the state and capital and labor equally distributed among the members of the state. Moreover, many of them would do away with religion, authority, social order, and family life. Huh. The fundamental principle of socialism is all property has been unjustly acquired. Consequently, in the new republic, no one is to possess personal property, but is to be provided for out of the public funds. Everyone must work, and with the proceeds of his labor, purchase what he needs. In the new republic of the extreme socialists, there is to be ni due ni maitre, neither the ordinances of religion nor the institutions of law. These men openly declare themselves to be atheists and Republicans. They say religion concerns the individual alone. Wow, America. Sorry. The intercourse, that's the thing. People think this whole separation of religion and state and church and state is for our benefit. And the answer is no. The answer is it's for the benefit of those who want to have power over us. See, that's the thing. That's what liberals, they always try to sell you something, but in reality the results are the opposite, right? So now you're removing God's law, and God's law was in place to protect his people. So what do you think's going to happen? That's what people just don't understand, and I don't know how to make them understand that. I am not a believer in separation of church and state. I'll be honest with you. There is no way it could possibly work, as we have seen, as we are seeing, as the experiment of America comes to a close. All right. Anyway, the intercourse of man and woman is to take the place of wedlock. Wow, isn't that the truth? The children are to belong not to their parents but to the state, to be educated at the public expense. A public kitchen is to supersede the domestic hearth. Prisons will not be needed, for there will be no criminals, since all crime comes from the possession of private property. These principles have spread chiefly among the irreligious, who care only for the gratification of their appetites in the lower orders. The proletariat, who in the division of property have nothing to lose and all to gain. They are mostly held by certain ones of the laboring class who have been thrown by peculiar circumstances into the arms of socialism. And it's going to get into it, but you actually see how that's a sin in and of itself. Just because you don't have something, you shouldn't be coveting what your neighbor has. That goes against, it's a violation of the law, right? So those who buy into socialism have nothing to lose, is what this is saying, and they think that they have stuff to gain by taking what is their neighbors and coveting what is their neighbors. But anyway, the origin and development of socialism is chiefly to be ascribed to the increasing poverty of the working class, the greed of gain, and immoderate craving for enjoyment among the rich, and finally the decrease of religious feeling in all classes of society. So that's interesting. The origin and development of socialism is chiefly to be ascribed to an increase in poverty, the greed of gain and immoderate craving for enjoyment or amusement, right, among the rich, and finally the decrease of religious feeling in all classes of society. As in the human body, disorders for the most part originate in the stomach, so discontent among the people generally arises from material wants. The prevailing destitution among the lower orders is partly due to the employment of machinery, right? So, as we saw yesterday, industrialization was the main goal of Soviet Russia, right? But in reality, that introduction of machinery was putting people out of work, paving the way for that communist takeover. Wealth has accumulated in the hands of the manufacturers, and the number of the poor and discontented has increased from day to day, swelling the ranks of socialism. The employers, striving to make larger profits in many cases, do not do not treat their work people according to the maxims of the gospel. They reduce their wages to a scanty pittance, the market value of labor being so low. So if they just paid their people a just wage as God calls for, there would be no room for socialism. See how that works? They require them to work for a lengthened period. They heed not the bodily health of those they employ, and even destroy their sense of religion and morality. These and other evils naturally have the effect of rendering the workmen irreligious and discontented. So they're even putting spiritual health on these employers. Fascinating. Factory hands, employed constantly in working machinery, are apt to lose their mental vigor and independence. They perform their task mechanically and are easily beguiled and misled. So they're saying there's no dignity in these factories kind of settings. The exhaustion produced by long hours of labor disinclines them to raise their hearts to God. Thus they neglect their prayers. The wretched state of their homes, where several families live crowded together on account of poverty caused by the low rate of wages, adds to their moral degradation. Moreover, the sight of the rich man's greed of money on the one hand and his extravagant expenditure and love of luxury on the other excites the envy of the poor man, and arouses in him the desire to satisfy his idea of happiness at the cost of the capitalist. Thus, God punishes, this is super fascinating. Pay attention to this. Thus, God punishes the rich in the way that they have sinned. The socialist is the scourge wherewith he chastises them. And if I can think of anything more relevant to America, it's that. We are being punished, our greed, because we are greedy and over indulgent with every kinds of everything, money, pleasures, everything. Thus God punishes the rich in the way they have sinned. The socialist is the scourge wherewith he chastises them. In the present day, the Christian faith is more and more undermined by irreligious press, by godless associations, notably the Freemasons, and in some lands by anti Christian legislation. Witness the exclusion of religious instruction from the schools, America. What wonder if the belief in God and a future life grows dim, the divine commandments are unheeded, and the people craving for happiness in this life seek to wrest his wealth from their richer neighbor. Wow. So, as you can see, the problem is created when God is taken out of society, out of the fabric of the land, out of the economy, so to speak. So they create the crisis by taking God out. And then socialism is the fix to the crisis that they created that would have been avoided if they had just done things God's way to begin with. So that's why there's no human fix to any of this, because the only fix is to go and repent and put on sackcloth and ashes and return back to God. Fascinating, right? So now you see why my amazement at this explanation, it still goes on for a couple more pages, and then the one in the new catechism, and all of a sudden it makes sense as to why we are where we are. If the dangers wherewith socialism threatens us are to be averted, the condition of the laboring class must be ameliorated. The rich must be liberal towards the poor, and the religion must regain her place in the hearts of the people. Coercive measures will do no more good to the socialist than random blows will correct a naughty child. If anything is to be done for him, it must be done through kindness. Above all, the employer must deal with his work people according to the principles of Christianity and justice. Kettler is right when he says, if for one day we all acted in conformity with the teaching of the gospel, all social evils would be at once swept away. The employer must pay his men properly. That is, their wages must be sufficient to support a Christian family suitably to their station, provided they are thrifty, industrious, and virtuous. The position of the workman must be secured. He must not be treated as a chattel, only to be employed as long as a good profit is to be got out of him. As the workman pays taxes, he is entitled to the privilege of the franchise. Opportunities of improving his mind should be afforded to him by the institution of libraries, evening classes, and the formation of working men's clubs, which the Holy Father strongly advocates. Legislation must also interfere to prevent the undue growth of the proletariat through the absorption of lesser industries by the factories and the accumulation of capital in the hands of a few plutocrats. And that's what we have in America. We have all these monopolies. We have an oligarchy is what we have. The rich ought, as the apostle says, to give easily and communicate to others. Now more than ever, the rich are bound to give alms, otherwise they will be rigorously judged. But religion affords the most effectual means of combating socialism. Social democracy is too often nothing but the absence of religious belief. Let me say that again. Social democracy is too often nothing but the absence of religious belief. Its chief dogma is the non-existence of God and of a future life. Its chief commandment, the gratification of the senses. Moreover, religion alone can give the poor the spirit of contentment, so essential to their happiness. Some of the socialistic theories could not possibly be realized. Others might indeed be carried out, but they would be attended by fatal consequences. The universal equality which socialists propose to bring about is an utterly impractical idea, especially in regard to property. For if the state apportioned to everyone the exact amount required for his livelihood, what more probable than that would one spend it all and another put a part by? Thus, an inequality would immediately arise, and to enforce the surrender of a man's savings would be sheer tyranny. The same endless variety which we see in nature exists among mankind. Differences of age, of sex, of health, of physical power, and mental endowments, above all of character and of manners, cannot be effaced, and from these differences of position and of possessions are inseparable. Just as in an army, all the soldiers cannot be officers, nor all the privates, so all members of society cannot stand on the same level. Exactly. Equality, social equality is not a Christian teaching. It's not. Some must manage the business of the state or occupy themselves with military affairs, and they must naturally hold a higher rank than the other members of the state, because they work more exclusively for the commonwealth. The happiness the socialist dreams of is not attainable upon earth. Whatever the exertions that may be made to ameliorate the lot of man here below, none can succeed in eliminating from it suffering, sickness, and death. Sorrow and suffering are the portions of mankind. A life of peace and enjoyment is not for this world. Let me repeat that. A life of peace and enjoyment is not for this world. And that is the big lie that starts at a small age of brainwashing our kids in these schools. You can be all, you can be anything you want and all this nonsense. It's just simply not true. We don't all have the same abilities. We just don't. And life is not about peace and enjoyment. Life is about getting to heaven. True happiness is not found in sensual pleasures, but in God. While the whole world lasts, crime, vice, and poverty cannot be banished from it. Our Lord says, "The poor you have always with you." John, and that was in John 12:8. And in regard to the proposed absorption of individual property by the state, this could not be accomplished without serious disturbances for who would be willing to surrender his property without a struggle. And where community of goods once introduced, tranquility would not be obtained. The oppressed minority would, out of revenge, commit fearful outrages. Besides, laborious and industrious individuals would not be content, as they would gain nothing by their industry. Thus, the working class would lose instead of gaining. Socialistic theories could only be realized if men were like the lower animals, destitute of the love of liberty and the desire for improvement. Socialism would cast a blight upon culture and destroy all stimulus, all motive for the exercise of inventive genius. Few would exert themselves to make progress and aim at perfection if they knew their achievements would bring them no reward. In the socialistic republic, all would be slaves. No man would exert himself to do better than another. If he knew all was provided for him, there would be a premium upon slothfulness and negligence. Slothfulness is a deadly sin, right? Experience has shown the evils brought upon mankind by the example of communities which have had their goods in common, and which have been noted for their crimes and have come to an ignominious end. But although the dreams of the socialist are mere fantasies of the brain, yet like much else that is undesirable, they are not without a certain use. As a hurricane tears down what is rotten and crazy, check this out. As a hurricane tears down what is rotten and crazy, so socialism points out the weak points in the social structure and compels our rulers to institute the needful reforms. So all is not lost. Could be used for good, right? Attention has been drawn preeminently to the exploitation of the laborer by the capitalist, and the claims of the poor have been brought into notice. Yet the harm done by socialism is far greater than any possible good it may indirectly produce. All who endeavor by unlawful means to deprive their neighbor of his personal property live in a state of mortal sin. The mere fact of coveting what belongs to another is a sin. We know that all sins bring others in their train, and this is no exception to the rule. St. Paul says that the inordinate desire of money is the root of all evils. And the utterances of socialists at their gatherings prove the truth of these words. Their speeches often abound with virulent attacks upon all in authority, on the Pope, on priests, and civil magistrates. Some go as far as to assert that perjury in a court of law is permissible if it furthers their own interests. We know the crimes of which anarchists have been guilty: dynamite outrages and assassinations. Let it not be said in behalf of their principles that the early Christians had all things in common, for the voluntary sharing of goods is quite different to what the socialists propose to enforce. The fundamental principle of Christian charity, which urges to almsgiving, is this: brother, what is mine is thine, whereas the socialist says, brother, what is thine is mine. Again, the socialist points to the religious orders, where all is the property of the community. They say what is possible for them is possible in the state of the future. There is, however, no analogy between the two, for voluntary poverty and obedience from the basis of the religious life form the basis of the religious life, while in the state of the future, while in the state of the future, sensual gratifications are to be encouraged and enjoyed. Wow. That is pretty deep there. Pretty deep analysis of the evils of socialism. And to me, it just blows my mind. I know people that do government studies where they, call religious entities, priests, pastors of other religions, and ask them their political stance. And you would not believe the amount of Catholic priests that consider themselves social democrats, socialist democrats, whatever, and have communist, socialist leanings. I hate to be the one to break it to you, but it is not in accordance with the teachings of the Catholic Church. And according to the catechism, if you believe in socialism and covet your neighbor's belongings, you are in a state of mortal sin, which requires confession. Oh boy, I wonder if there's anybody having these conversations with the current rulers of our age in the current church hierarchy. I would say no. I would say these conversations aren't being had. And I think it's largely been glossed over in the new catechism, which is disappointing. But it's logical now to see why we are where we're at. So I just found that interesting. Hope you did too. And pray for the consecration of Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary so the horrors of socialism and communism on a worldwide level can be avoided. That's all I can say. Have a great day, everyone. Joan of Arc Media out.